So Sheila is one of those characters that, again, from my experience of seeing answers all the time, tends to be kind of categorized really, really obviously. People go, ah, yeah, at the beginning, she's like a young, naive little girl, and then she grows and changes and becomes this. Now, I think that's an incredibly simple reading of it. I don't think that pays attention to the truth behind the character as we go through. And I've called this hopes crushed because I'm not talking about Sheila's hopes being crushed. I'm talking about the idea that Sheila, rather than, as people like to say, representing change and the hope for the future, I would say she represents that those hopes have been crushed. I'll explain to you as we go along why. So my thesis for today, basically, is that people, as we say Sheila represents the hopes of the future. But the point I'm making is that future, because this is a historical play, has been and gone. She can't be a hope for a future that's already happened. And of course, she made absolutely no difference at all. There were still 2 world wars, horror, more people dying than ever before or since. So that's the thesis that I'm going towards. Therefore, if I'm right, what it's saying is that her purpose in the play is completely different to what a lot of people say. Okay. So what I'm going to do is start off by suggesting to you how I think Sheila starts at the beginning. And I'm going to use this idea that I've come up with as a shorthand to explain things. But the idea that there are 2 Sheilas at the beginning of the play. Now, obviously, there really aren't 2 Sheilas, but I'm suggesting there are 2 sides to her. There's a side of her that is ready to go down the line that's socially accepted and expected of her to become Gerald's wife, to become Mrs. Croft, and to eventually supposedly go on the way to becoming her mother. All right? But there's the other side that's ready to learn, that's ready to change. It's already there at the beginning. She doesn't need to learn it. It's already there inside her. Now, from the beginning, the very beginning, how do we know this? Right. Look at the things that suggest she's ready to become Mrs. Croft. The idea that she's described in the stage directions at the beginning as very pleased with life and rather excited because it's her engagement party. The possessiveness that goes with her when she's talking about Gerald in that very first lines. And again, that phrase, you know, purple-faced old men, is it's very dismissive, really, and very childish, really, I suppose, in its own sense, to dismiss people that way. And then many of you know that the quotation there, the idea that when she gets given her ring by Gerald, it's the one he wanted her to have. Many of you will use that very clearly. Put that together with the fact that then after that, father has to tell her off for not listening to him because she's still admiring her ring. And that does seem to put across that stereotypical view that she's a silly little girl, childish, naive. But that's ignoring certain parts of the opening. Now, this is a reference to almost one of the first things that happens to her. We've had all the purple-faced old men, whatever. If you remember, what happens is Arthur commits that faux pas of thanking the cook and is told off for it. And his response is to say, no, I'm just trying to teach Gerald like one of the family. I insist on it. And Gerald says, yeah, absolutely, I want to be treated as one of the family. And then throws in that line, which I won't go into too much because I dealt with it a few weeks ago with Gerald. I've been trying long enough, haven't I? That really kind of bitchy line, really, where he's having a right, you know, just dig at her for apparently turning him down so many times and making him wait so long. But when he says that, that's the stage direction. So when he picks at her, when this supposedly, you know, patriarchal figure picks at this naive little girl, what does she do? She ignores it. And he has to repeat it and says, haven't I? At which point she refers to the previous summer. And we later find out, just as we suspect when we hear that he was having an affair, and she suspected it all along. Now, the half serious, half playful thing is the interesting bit here. I'm sure you've discussed it before, but to me, that's the two sides of her together, you see. So she's making a comment to him. Yeah, you tried really hard, except for that summer you didn't come anywhere near me. Now, if she says that seriously, that's a dig. That's like, don't try and put one over on me. Don't try and push the idea that I've been standing in the way. What were you doing last summer? You didn't do any of that. That's the serious part. The playful part is the one who feels that she can't be serious about it. Oh, yeah, except for that time last summer, where she really means it, but she has to say it in a playful way. That's my reading of this. Now, the fact she's between the two shows she's between the two as a character at this point. To me, she wants to say that to him, seriously and outright, but half of it is playful because at this point she's not completely able to. However, this isn't the only evidence. Once then, of course, Mrs. Burling intervenes and starts saying, don't tease him, and gives that awful speech about, men with important work to do just have to be put up with. You'll just have to deal with that like I did. She, of course, then replies, I don't think I will. Now, that's a direct response to her mother saying, I ain't going to be like you. You say you got to put up with it, I ain't putting up with it. This is more than a naive little girl. This is a girl who has some kind of ambition, of thought behind her, has some kind of strength behind her. She's ready to do things differently from her mother. But she has the social pressure on her on the other side at the same time. Now, as the play moves on, those two Sheilas begin to do battle, right? Now, what I'm talking about here particularly is the moment when she comes back in after having to leave the room with her mother, comes back in the middle of, or just at the end, I suppose, actually, of the interrogation of her father. What's this about streets, that thing? She comes in very happily, but we see immediately those two sides working away at each other. When she's told about the death of Eva Smith by suicide, as usual, remember, the inspector comes at her with some really, really kind of graphic language and descriptions. He always does, to force home the point. That's how she replies. Oh, how horrible, first of all. Very like Eric, who, remember, when he heard, went, oh my God, involuntarily. What she's doing here is showing that she naturally reacts badly to this. She's horrified by this naturally. Now, that's not true of Arthur, who goes, yes, horror business, what's it got to do with me? All right? Or of Gerald, who says nothing. So that does show, again, a natural empathy on her side with this working class girl. But then she follows it up by asking, was it an accident? And there comes our childish, naive girl again. I may be being unfair here, but was it an accident? How do you drink a bottle of disinfectant by accident? Walk along. She's walking along. She's left her disinfectant on the floor without the top on, and she trips over and falls over, and unfortunately her mouth goes straight over the bottle, and she rolls over, and it pours down her throat. I mean, it's a silly thing to say, isn't it? Come on. She's caught between the two. It's like the two are inside battling against each other. She does it again a few lines later. We get that bit, I'm sure you remember, she's distressed. I mean, most of us will react to that. No, suicide. Oh God, it's horrible. But would we then, seconds later, be sitting there going, sorry, I wasn't listening. I can't help thinking about this girl. That's so bad. Because that's what she's saying, isn't it? I cannot stop thinking about this. It's really hit home. It's really bothered her. She is genuinely distressed. But then it has to come back to, and I've been so happy tonight, oh, I wish you hadn't told me. So the genuine distress is not followed by, I wish you hadn't done it, or anything along those lines. It's no, not I wish you hadn't done it. I wish you hadn't actually told me about it. I just wish I didn't know about it. Again, childish and naive. We're halfway between the two here. And when she follows up by asking whether she was young and pretty, again, it seems, why are you interested in that? Why is that important? We could take it that way. But before long, she is cutting over the top of her father, who's trying to get her out of the room and saying, you know, I think actually it's the bit where he's asking to speak to the inspector in the corner and get this over and done with. And she just cuts her tongue and goes, why should you? Why should you? Again, her father. Think of the kind of relationships we're expecting to see, we're thinking of here, and the way that Arthur treats her. You can see what I mean about moving between the two. And now it begins to take over totally. I think it was a mean thing to do, she says to him about when she hears what he did. It did awful things for her. I should think so. Warmly. It's a rotten shame. And one of obviously the best known quotes in the entire play, but these girls aren't cheap labour, they're people. And incidentally, can I just point out to you, remember that this comes before the inspector has even really started to talk to Sheila. I see every year people trying to use this as an example of how she's changed. Nothing's happened at this point. Okay? This is her natural self. So I would say when you look at this, what you see is, you see that Sheila is a naturally empathetic person. She cares. She's bothered. She can listen and take on board things about people who aren't herself. She sees these girls as people. But that element of expectation, of social expectation, is still there. It's starting to push away. It's starting to push away, but it's still there. Now, using this to Sheila's analogy, what I think then happens is that this then resolves, and it resolves at a key moment. And this, to me, is revealing what the point of Sheila is in this play. And it's basically, obviously, when she's shown the photograph. Because the initial reaction when she's shown the photograph is that, okay? When she recognises it, she gives a half-stifled sob and then runs out. The half-stifled sob I find quite interesting. Remember, she's going to sob. She tries and stops it. Why does she try and stop it? Is that very much the way to behave? I mustn't make an outrageous noise in public. And then she runs out. She runs away from her problems when she realises it. This is that girl at the beginning, the one who won't cope with anything. And if she stayed out at that point, there is absolutely no doubt she will be backed up by her parents, by Gerald, because that's how they see her. But she comes back in very, very quickly. Less than 2 pages on your copy of the play script. And therefore, what, 2 minutes maximum, she's out. She comes back in, and that Sheila's dead. We never see that Sheila again. Once she's come back in, she has taken on the role completely of the one who's ready to learn. She walks back in and, like nobody else, immediately says, right, so I'm responsible. Remember, this is only a few minutes after Arthur has said, I can't take any responsibility for what I've done. And that's with arguing with the inspector about it. The inspector hasn't even said anything yet. She's seen the photograph and she immediately says, no, I'm responsible. A key moment. So this leads, as I said, a lot of people into thinking, okay, she's being portrayed as the hope for the future. That's the point of her. She is a hope for the future for all the audience sat there watching. And you can see why they'd argue it. There are things about her that exude hope. The fact she takes that responsibility without prompting. The fact that she comes to understand the inspector and his message over the course of the play. The fact that she's able to focus on the importance of truth. I mean, a really, really big, important one there. Even Eric doesn't really go at the idea of truth. Truth and openness. Remember that when she says to Gerald, you know, after he's literally just confessed his feelings for even all the things that he did, and the fact that maybe he actually only did it because he felt like a knight in shining armor. And she turns around and goes, best thing you said all night. At least it was truthful. And the fact that she praised him when he leaves, saying, well, look, at least you told the truth. I actually like you more than I did because of that. And then at the end, she takes on the role of the inspector after he leaves. And she continues to push his final message, particularly in one line that she gets near the end. Lots of people like to focus on the idea that the inspector, when he leaves, delivers Priestley's message to everybody. And to a degree, he does. But I think this is the true message of the play that's going on at the end, where she can sum up the truth. And it's kind of the point as to why everybody in the play can take on the idea that maybe there isn't anybody dead. Maybe it was different people. But the message remains the same. Everything that we said had happened really had happened. And that's the truth. The process was exactly what he said. Whatever the truth is of who's alive and who's dead and however many gods there were, the process is the same. The only difference is the outcome. And if the outcome wasn't tragic, that's just lucky for us. That's his point. It's not about the outcome. It's about your behavior leading up to the outcome. That's the point of the play. That's how he views socialism and responsibility for each other. And it comes straight out of her mouth at the end. No wonder people are going to sit there and say, look, she's the hope for the future. It's a great argument. But going back to my original argument, the problem is this is a historical play. It has to be at the heart of your memory. It's quite deliberate. And it's set way back in the past. This is 1946 and it's set in 1912. 34 years back. Now, I'm not going to try and do that in terms of today in setting it back, because I'll end up with something that will sound ridiculous. It's 1986, I think, or something like that, isn't it? That it will go back to. No, it wouldn't be. It'd be 1991, 34 years ago, wouldn't it? And that sounds ridiculously old to you, I'm sure. Okay, wow, that is a long time ago. But I did my A-levels in 1991, so it doesn't feel very long ago to me. So the point behind this all, is he hasn't just set it a few years back in the past, he sent it massively back in the past. It's a reflection of how things are. If you wrote a play today set in 1991, you are not commenting on the current situation. You're commenting on the past and how that reflects on the current situation. So when we look back at 1946, the time it's being written, everything that the inspector warned about in his speech has happened. I'll remind you, you all remember it. I'm sure you could probably quote it to me in like a big chorus coming back. But the inspector says, if men do not learn this message, then they will be taught it in blood and fire and anguish. Fire and blood and anguish. Right? We all know that. And they were taught it in fire and blood and anguish. In two of the most horrific wars that ever happened. And his audiences sat there and they just lived through 6 years of hell. And every one of that audience will have lost people, will have lost maybe parents, maybe children, maybe siblings, maybe friends. And their parents or grandparents would have lost people in the First World War too. They know this has happened. And therefore, they surely aren't going to sit there and go, oh, look, Sheila's the hope for the future. Because she wasn't. Everything that was warned about happened. Men did not learn their lesson. Okay? Sheila and Eric's response, the whole focus of it that people talk about as a hope for the future, made absolutely no difference at all. And that changes her role hugely, doesn't it? Because we go from somebody who is, oh, look, the younger generation, the hope for the future. Oh, look, he's saying that the young are the people who can bring us out of this. Well, they didn't. They weren't powerful enough to do that. And then you add to that in 1946, Sheila is now no longer the younger generation. In 1946, she'd be pretty much the same age that Sybil, her mother, was in the play. So she is now effectively Sybil. I think he'd be aware of this as well. I'm sure he'd thought that. What would have happened to her? Who knows? Would she be becoming her mother? Probably not. I doubt she'd have gone back to the Victorian age. Would she have married Gerald in the end? Quite possibly. Certainly, she would have lived through the awfulness of the war and various things happening. It's idle speculation. But for one thing, I don't know about you, but I would be convinced that Eric, for example, would have signed up almost immediately at the beginning of the First World War, and almost certainly, especially with his character, he'd be dead pretty quick, wouldn't he? So I should have at least lost a brother. I'm certain, probably Gerald, I doubt, because Gerald was probably too posh and ended up being an officer behind the lines. But the idea that we're meant to think about, if they wanted change, they saw the change and they couldn't do it. So does it suddenly become, the message is, it's not enough for just the young to do it. We need to go with, others need to go with them. You see, if we then stop and think about Sheila's role in that situation, I would argue that what do we see? We see somebody who needs a push to reject those social expectations at the beginning that are placed on her. But the fact that she rejects it is possible because her character and ideals are already there. You're starting from a winning position, okay? We see that she takes on the key messages of the inspector, and therefore Priestley, of responsibility, truth, and empathy. They're the key message. So again, what's her role? Showing us they're the key things: responsibility, truth, and empathy, and showing us that others can take them on. But she's not enough on her own. She's not enough even with Eric to change the future, and therefore the whole younger generation are not enough to change the future. My argument, which I put forward in the Gerald session I did a few weeks ago, is that actually it's the Geralds who have to be on board. You have to get people like them in society. You'll never get the Burlings, Arthur and Sybil. You need the Geralds to be on board for change. And so finally then, her vacillation at the very end, vacillation is, going between two things, back and forth between two ideas. I'm again referring particularly to the way that he offers her the ring back, and she says, not yet, it's too soon, I've got to think about it, rather than just saying, no, get out of here, you horrible bloke. You know, that speaks to me as to the power that social expectations and comfort have over action. Even after everything that happened, even after what she's seen, at the end of the play, she still has that temptation to go back to that comfortable life that she can have as Mrs. Croft. And she's tempted. Whether she does or not, we don't know. But I think that's a warning for us all, that it's not enough just to see it all, you have to follow it through. So the idea of Sheila being representing the crushing of hopes, that's where I began. And that's what I think we see. Not saying that he's saying to us that there is no hope for the future. Obviously, he is saying there is hope for the future. But it's not just in Sheila. The young ones, he says, we often have a stronger effect on them earlier in the play. And that's his point. We can influence the young one, but it's the others that need to come with us. And that, I think, is what Gerald's saying. After all, who's in his audience? It's not really made up of many Sheilas and Geralds, Sheilas and Erics, is it? For one thing, an awful lot of the Erics are dead after the Second World War, but it's not really them. It's more made up of the Mr. and Mrs. Burling types. His theatre audience is a middle class audience, older possibly in a lot of cases, and that's maybe who he's preaching to the more. The blame is there, but the way he sees things going forward is as well. Okay,